Okay, so the front wheels go one way and the back wheels the other way. How does that work? We'll find out this week on Motoring 2002.
TSN's Motoring 2002 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.
You know, at first glance, it looks like I'm driving your everyday full-size GM pickup truck, which I am. But if you look a little closer, in fact, check out the back wheels. Yes, those wheels are turning. It's not your imagination. I'm driving the Sierra Denali, and it's equipped with four-wheel steering or quadra-steer. We'll talk more about that later, but first, we're going to check out a car company that has really gained its reputation on building station wagons, including the rugged cross-country. But as we saw at this year's Detroit Auto Show, Volvo has decided that maybe it's time to go with the flow.
I give you the new Volvo X90.
This is the next step of our cross-country portfolio. The sport utility marketplace is something that we haven't been into. It's an opportunity for us to expand in that marketplace, but very much in a Volvo way, in a Volvo characteristic, providing a safe, strong alternative to a wagon, but a sport utility that's something that Volvo can stamp its name on.
The reason for, of course, we have looked at this before, many years, many times, but it's the first time now when we think we have a concept that fits into the brand image and our demands of safety, environmental concern and things like that.
I think that in America the horse-drawn vehicle is still what people would rather drive, and if you look at especially American trucks, I mean in Europe the truck has a flat front and the driver sits over the engine, but not here, where they have to sit behind that engine or behind the team of horses with the cowboy hat and boots and the country and western music on. It's part of America's history, and I think people do still live that, and the sport utility could almost be seen as the modern covered wagon.
Do we see a stagecoach in this Volvo Sport Utility? Tell me a little bit about you in this vehicle.
Well, the layout is quite different actually. You're sitting up high, yes, but the front it's not an aggressive, it's not huge front end. I didn't want to make a macho looking car, but the layout is different in that the inside of the car, the occupants move forward. We've got an inline engine turned through 90 degrees, which allows us to move everybody up in all our cars. So with the sport utility, although you're sitting up high, I wouldn't call it sitting behind the horses. It's more like in the cockpit of a fighter plane. Sitting high and in command, a lot of glass, a very raked windscreen, and very far forward in the vehicle. So the image is quite different.
Volvo's first response to the sport utility craze was to introduce the Cross Country with all-wheel drive and extra ground clearance. The question is, can the Cross Country survive the arrival of the XC90?
Actually, we see it as incremental volume for Volvo. We think there's a consumer base that just wants that sport utility to support their lifestyle, but there's a market for the wagons in which people have decided that sport utility is not for them, and we still own that marketplace. We can't continue to own that marketplace. We don't believe there'll be a lot of cannibalization between the two.
One special thing about Volvo is it's not just our own customers and their family that we try to look after. We have to think about the other guy, the guy that runs into the Volvo. And of course it's a tricky subject, the sport utility versus a small car. What we've done though is we've designed a structure in the XC90 that matches the height of a car's bumper beam, so that when the XC90 is hit by a small car, a normal car, the bumpers actually match, so it doesn't ride over. It just it sets up the safety systems of the other car as well, so people are not threatened by being in a collision with one of our sport utilities.
This comes off the S60 and S80 platform. This is the same platform across the whole P2 lineup. It's something that's been in the works actually since 1998, and it's a very successful platform that is so adaptable.
The design director's job is to set a sort of vision, to have a vision, and then through the efforts of the whole team and guiding them along the same direction to achieve at least that vision, but hopefully even better. And I'm very pleased with this.
A giveaway for 18988? That sign might just be right. More later on Kenzie's Corner.
Having reached 142 countries around the world, the Corolla has become the world's best-selling nameplate. This week, we slip behind the wheel of a vehicle that has a little bit of Corolla, but elsewhere, it's all Matrix. After the launch of the Protégé 5, it was only a matter of time before other manufacturers jumped on this very logical bandwagon. The Matrix is the next of what promises to be a lengthy list. The beauty of the design is that it combines the best of both worlds. From a driving perspective, the compact dimensions brings a city-friendly vehicle, and then there's the flexibility side of the Matrix's split personality. A lot of thought obviously went into the back end of this Matrix. To begin with, there's a handle on the tailgate, so you don't need to fumble around looking for the key or the button on the dashboard. Once you've got the back open, the seats fold flat in one smooth motion, and there's no fewer than 16 different tie-downs. That means anything stored back here won't jump all over you when you hit the brakes. There's also umpteen different storage spots dotted all over the show, and the best bit, the floor is flat, meaning there's absolutely no lift over. The best bit, however, you can actually open the tailgate glass, but to accomplish that you need the key, and that was done for a specific reason. The tailgate's now locked, which prevents this lot from crashing into the roof. All in all, it's been packaged together very nicely. The long and the short of it says, with the seats up, you've got 617 litres of cargo space at your disposal. Dropping the seats flat bumps that number to a wagon-like 1506 litres. The versatility in back flows through to the front, where you can fold the passenger seat forward to accommodate much longer items. The irony is, this plastic protector actually sits below the fabric, so you end up chafing this if you've got anything rough. The rest of the layout, well, the car is nicely attired and everything is easily reached and accessed, and there's just enough chrome to make it attractive, especially the stuff around the dials. The only other weak point, well, it boils down to this shifter. It is rather notchy and certainly not one of Toyota's better efforts. The Matrix is offered with a couple of engines. The base unit brings 123 horsepower when it's tied up to the all-wheel drive system, or 130 horsepower in this front-wheel drive edition. However, if you really want to jazz this thing up and turn it into a true pocket rocket, take the Celica-based engine. That 1.8 litre unit ups the horsepower to 180. It's just a pity you can't marry it to the all-wheel drive system. The difference between the engines is the amount of technology stuffed beneath the valve cover. In the base engine, it adopts variable valve timing to spread the power over a broader range while cutting emissions, and is, quite frankly, good enough to satisfy most buyers. The up-level motor, however, adds variable valve lift to the already variable valve timing. At low engine speeds, the intake valves follow a cam profile designed to maximize low-end pull. Above 6,000, the engine switches to a more aggressive profile, which allows more air and fuel into the cylinder. It's that simple and very enjoyable to boot. Depending upon the model, the suspension differs. The front-wheel drive cars use McPherson struts up front and a beam axle in back, while the four-wheel drive model adopts a better double wishbone design. Regardless of type, the spring and damping characteristics are comfortably compliant while keeping the amount of rock, roll and understeer to a minimum. Both models also benefit from tow control functions that limits the tendency for the rear end of the car to steer during hard transitions or when braking. Through the pylons, this showed up as a sure-footed, predictable response to steering input in spite of the less than ideal conditions. We traded in our front-wheel drive Matrix for this all-wheel drive version. So what is the big deal about all-wheel drive? Well, it's quite simple. What happens with a front-wheel drive vehicle, you've got to push 50 horsepower through each of the front wheels if the engine's pumping out 100. When you go to this all-wheel drive vehicle, because all four are working together, well, you've only got to handle 25 horsepower per wheel. The result, better traction. And it transformed a run through the pylon test that would have been a joke in the front-wheel drive vehicle into a very acceptable affair in this all-wheel drive. Stopping power comes from a decent set of front discs and rear drums. The sportier XRS model ups the stopping power by adding rear discs and electronic brake force distribution to the ABS. This limits the pressure sent to the rear brakes, which in turn moves the rate at which the anti-lock system triggers. It can also split the brake force left to right in a corner. There is a rub in all of this, of course, and that is that anti-lock brakes are optional if available. In the 20th century this was wrong. Today, well, it's unforgivable. You know, I've long been a fan of the hatchback, primarily because of the versatility it adds to any vehicle. This new mini wagon concept takes the whole thing to the next level. On the one hand, it's city-friendly because of its compact dimensions. On the other, well, it'll accommodate anything that a small SUV will, but without guzzling anywhere near the amount of gas. It's little wonder then that you're going to see this type of vehicle proliferate very soon.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns checking the fluids that protect your engine and transmission. Remember, most engine and transmission failures are traceable to either insufficient fluid or poor quality fluid that was left in there far past its life expectancy. In the case of engine oil, you want to check it with every full tank of fuel. Make sure the vehicle's been off for several minutes so all the oil has dripped back down into the engine oil pan. Make sure it's level, take your reading and top up as necessary. Remember that engine oil, as it ages, picks up contaminants. That's one of the things it does in the engine. So it does discolor. Starts out a light golden color or tan color, goes chocolate brown, and eventually black if you leave it in there long enough. That's not unexpected, and that's why you change it. Change it at the intervals suggested in your owner's manual. Transmission fluid should be checked with the engine idling and up to temperature, and with the transmission in park in most cases. However, consult your owner's manual or the dipstick for specifics in this matter. And change the transmission fluid once again at the owner's manual prescribed intervals. And that will depend on the type of service, whether it's light duty or severe service. When it comes to Rad Coolant, you want to check that with the engine stone cold so that there's no pressure or heat involved in the cooling system, because you could get hurt trying to open the rad cap on an engine that's up to temperature. Check it cold, make sure that it's full and good, clean condition. Change it at the prescribed intervals because Rad Coolant can look good but be well past its life expectancy. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Graham, our first test drive is starting off with a bang. We've got a new Mazda and a new Honda, and they both have something fairly new in the automotive industry: four-wheel steering.
It seems like just yesterday, but this was 14 years ago, motoring's first test drive, with Phil Godin talking with the young Graham Fletcher about four-wheel steering. Now, although mechanical four-wheel steering has long been used in construction equipment, the system did not catch on with cars, which rely on high-speed handling and stability. But it was just last year when General Motors gave auto journalists a peek at its take on four-wheel steering. They call it Quadra-Steer.
It's a product that we're going to come out with in the 2002 model year. And what it does is it changes the vehicle from feeling like a large vehicle. It improves the maneuverability in a parking lot situation. It improves your handling with the trailer and maneuverability with the trailer. It improves snow and ice handling, and if you go off-roading the system, it's great off-roading because you're able to make tight maneuvers and go around obstacles when you're off-roading.
When you come to these things, I mean, you get the free hotel room and the great meals and the entertainment, the rest of that, so you don't like to be wowed because then people just think you're being bought off. But this four-wheel steering system actually did wow me, as much as I'm loath to admit it as a jaded Canadian journalist.
I believe it's going to be, personally believe it's going to be as big as four-wheel drive.
We tried out the system on the 2002 GMC Sierra Denali. Turning the rear wheels to a maximum of 12 degrees in the opposite direction to the front wheels shaved the turning circle by 3 full meters. So essentially, this long truck can turn in a circle barely larger than that required by the Saturn SC Coupe. Now, as speed increases, the amount of steering required by the rear wheels is gradually reduced to a neutral position. There is also a 2-wheel steering mode for those times when turning the back wheels could cause a tense and expensive situation, especially if 4-wheel steering had caught on with cars when Graham first tried it out.
I think there is a spot for 4-wheel steering in the marketplace, but the concept has its detractors. In essence, what they're saying is the $1,500 may be better spent, say, in something like anti-lock brakes.
Next week on Test Drive, a 1988 Lincoln Continental.
Although General Motors was a little late getting into the game, the 4-door or quad cab setup makes living with a pickup truck so much more enjoyable. And you know, you gotta figure that Bill Gardner in the Quaker State Garage has gotta love this truck. I mean, it's a pickup truck, it's got 4-wheel steering and all the bells and whistles. I mean, it's Bill's kind of truck. How about it, Bill?
Brad, if you told me 5 years ago there'd be pickup trucks coming in my shop with an available 4-wheel steering system, I'd have probably laughed you out of the place. But you know, I guess I was off base. I should have thought back to 1989, the Honda Prelude. Remember those cars? They had an available 4-wheel steering system. I have a customer that bought one. He's still got the vehicle today. He's never had any problem with the components involved with that 4-wheel steering system. But it died out after a couple of model years on the Hondas, and I guess it was probably a tough sell on a vehicle that was already very, very maneuverable. But on a pickup truck, it's a whole different situation. Because of the long wheelbase and the overall size of the vehicle, maneuverability is a key factor. So the increased maneuverability available with a 4-wheel steering system is probably going to be an easy sell for GM on these C3 pickups. We've got one on the hoist. This is the first one I've ever seen, by the way, and it's kind of interesting. I thought you might like to see the components involved. If we look at the rear suspension here, the rear axle, we can see an electric steering gear assembly grafted onto the rear cover of the rear differential in this vehicle. We can see boots over here and here that protect the inner tie rod ends on that steering gear assembly. And out here we can see the outer tie rod end and the toe adjustment for the vehicle at the rear. Now out here at the end of the axle, you can see that they've added a large yoke to the end of the rear axle. The yoke comes down. We've got a lower ball joint and an upper ball joint and a knuckle out here at the wheel that's going to allow the rear wheels to turn. Go ahead and start the vehicle, Ron. When he turns the steering, you're going to see those rear wheels steer. Now that's the full range of motion for steering the rear wheels. Doesn't look like a lot, but believe me, if you're in a parking lot trying to maneuver this vehicle into a tight parking space, this thing will really turn sharp. It probably drives about like a small vehicle like a Honda Civic. Now you can see that they've put a skid plate underneath here to protect the steering gear assembly. Boots here, of course, to protect this from the weather. And we've got ball joints out here that are booted as well. But you know, all these extra components, when the vehicle gets a little bit older, there's certainly something that's going to have to be kept in mind. They may be a service issue. Sooner or later, some of these components will have to be replaced. Now, at one time, pickup trucks were like the last bastion of mechanical simplicity. Those days are obviously gone when you see a vehicle like this. If you buy something like this, you're going to have to be prepared for the fact that sometime down the road, you may have some quite expensive repairs when you have this kind of complexity. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2002.
One of my favorite auto show moments of all time was the introduction of the new Volkswagen Beetle at the Detroit Auto Show. Now, speculation had been that the price of the car would have to be under $18,000 US for it to be successful. Well, the German guy in charge of Volkswagen North America got up and he said, "The price of this car, $19,400. Everybody's faces fell. And then he added, "Canadian funds." Ha, those Germans and their wacky sense of humor. The American price was something like $15,600. That was a huge bargain. Well, I did the math, and it turns out the Canadian price was still about $2,000 less than the American price once you figured out the exchange rate. When you start to think, well, is that unusual? And the answer is no. Canadians have some of the lowest priced new cars in the world. You may find that hard to believe, but it's true. People think that the price of a car is somehow based on what it costs to make and to sell, add on some profit and Bob's your uncle. It's not like that at all. It's based on what the traffic will bear. Canada is basically a third world country with first world car infrastructure. They got to keep churning product to keep these dealerships going, and they got to price them at a level we can afford to pay. Now, if Canadian cars are so much cheaper than American cars, what's to keep Canadian dealers from selling their cars in the States? Honda, for example, had that situation with the Odyssey. It was about $6,000 cheaper in Canada. What's to stop a Honda dealer from selling a car in the States? How about losing this franchise? Honda said, you can't do that. We got to protect the profits of our American dealers. Well, now BMW's got a new thing going. If you want to buy a new Mini from a BMW store, you got to sign an agreement that you won't sell it in the States for 2 years. Wow, that's new. I mean, it's one thing for car companies to try and exert pressure on their dealers, but on their customers? I mean, can they get away with this? Well, BMW figures the appeal of this car is going to be so strong that people will sign anything just to get into a little Mini. Well, it's a pretty appealing car, but I wouldn't mind being in the courtroom the first time a customer tries to challenge that agreement. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, that's it for this week, but before we go, I just want to remind you about our webpage at motoringtv.com. It is always a work in progress, but we'd love to hear from you and any ideas you might have as to what you'd like to see on the webpage. Incidentally, later on this year, we are going to get you involved in selecting our overall Car of the Year. It should be fun. All right, that's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
How many people are going to say they've driven a Formula One car? I'm saving the pictures, I'm sending emails. People are going to feel humbled for sure.
TSN's Motoring 2002 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas. Keep a good thing going. Go Midas.